Chernobyl. You may know as a ghost town, receiving 100,000 tourists every year. Or maybe you've been in a music festival over there. But once, you saw an event never seen this planet before, a nuclear reactor meltdown. This picture was taken 3 days after the accident. But who melted down Chernobyl? That's why we are here. We, as chapter leads at ING Bank, we are the first line of response in case of incidents. So on 20th of May, we were in a bus, and we received a call from the war room. Our customers could not use the application to pay. For us, it was just one application. But imagine all those clients standing there at the terminals, unable to pay. That's really bad. So let's start with how a nuclear reactor works. But not any reactor, a Soviet RBMK reactor.
How does a nuclear reactor work? Let's get back to the basics. We have a Stirling steam engine, which uses steam to turn the turbines. We take atoms of uranium and bump them. Boom! It causes a nuclear chain reaction, which produces a vast amount of energy, which we can use to produce steam. But hey, there is a catch. If we do not control this reaction, the process may go out of hand. We do not want that. To have a controlled reaction, we use boron to absorb these extra neutrons to give us a sustainable release of energy, just the right amount we need. It is inserted into the reactor core, back and forth. Imagine, just like the brakes of a car, the more we press, the slower we go, and vice versa. In case of Chernobyl, we had 211 of these control rods, and some of them, 28 to be precise, had to be never removed, ever. Water is used in the reactor core as a coolant. But if all the water in the reactor core converts fully into steam, it accelerates the nuclear chain reaction, something which is really bad for the reactor. On a lighter note, 7 years before this incident took place, one of the Soviet officials was quoted as saying that the chances of nuclear meltdown at Chernobyl was 1 in 10,000 years. 1 in 10,000 years. If the chances were indeed this low, then what went wrong?
Well, it all began with a safety test. The plans for the test was quite simple. First, the reactor should be at a minimal optimal power level. Then, the steam turbine generator should be at a maximal speed. Then, we cut off the steam supply to the turbines, and we record the performance to see if it is able to keep the coolant pumps until the diesel generators can kick in. So when they start, the reactor was below the minimum requirement. So to counter this, the engineers in the control room start to remove the automatic system and manually extract the majority of the brakes. I'm not a nuclear physicist, but I could see that was a really bad idea. And just half an hour later, alarms were ignored. These guys were nuts. Then when the power rose a little bit, the procedures for the test continue, even though what is still below the minimum required. And as part of the plan, 1 hour into the test, extra water pumps were activated to increase the water flow. But because of this, the water flow exceeded the limit, triggering an alarm of a low steam pressure. And to make things worse, the engineers, in pure panic, decide to disconnect 2 pumps and remove more brakes to maintain power. Of course they did. Really bad idea. By this time, nearly all control rods, the brakes, have been removed. Even the safety ones, pushing the reactor to its limits. As a result, all these reckless mistakes from the engineers in the control room was responsible for the biggest nuclear disaster to date.
Now, since we have established who caused it to break down, let's take a moment and analyze some facts. Facts about failures, about people in those failures, and most importantly, the environment in which failure occurred. Let me ask all of you a question. Have you gotten up on one fine day and told yourself, let's go to work to do a bad job, let's break things, let's create an incident, cause chaos, and ultimately lead to a turmoil? Basically be the bad apple. No, right? People don't come to work to do a bad job. Inherently, it's human behavior to do the things that helps them to progress, to be seen good, to create an impact, to inspire others, and most importantly, to be appreciated. Pilots don't check in into flights to kill passengers. Nurses don't sign in to kill the patients. And engineers on that day at Chernobyl did not come to work to cause a meltdown. They didn't. A very important fact to keep in mind while investigating human error is that if it made sense for some people, it might make sense for others. And if it does indeed make sense for others, we should definitely ask why.
Now, let's have a look at what happened that day again. But this time, from the eyes of the engineers in the control room. After the accident, it was revealed that scientists knew about the design flaws in the RBMK reactor. Also, it was in operation for 2 years without some critical safety features. And last but not least, the mandatory approvals for the test was not granted by the nuclear regulators. We know work environment plays a key role in people's behavior and decisions. In this case, an extremely hierarchical working culture pushed for decisions without feedback from the engineers. On that day, Kiev City was in need of power. The factories was working around the clock to reach the targets by the end of the month. So Chernobyl postponed the test for 10 hours. And despite the delay, the preparation for the test is still carried out. So the test plan was passed to the night shift, who have a very limited time to prepare for it. Only the day shift was training for the test. Topchunov, senior engineer, was 25 years old and has been in the job for only 4 months. Daitlov, the chief engineer of Chernobyl, was there. And since he was the highest ranked engineer, he ignored critical feedback from others and just pushed for his own vision. Now, the reactor was below the minimum required level. And the engineers tried to manually reach that requirement. And they did it because management demanded them to do so. Also, alarms were commonly ignored because they never pose a significant threat during normal operations. The water flow exceeded the limit, triggering an alarm of low steam pressure. Due to the nature of the test, it was expected to have some alarms being triggered. The power station doesn't know they are running some tests. By this time, nearly all control rods have been removed. They knew it may lead to some unstable reaction, a known risk. Yet, management decided to take this step because they did not know about the design flaws in the reactor itself. They believe they have a safety net in form of a button that would instantly shut down the reactor in case things go wrong. Unfortunately, the design flaws in the reactor cause it to become completely out of control.
When we hear to these narratives and look at the events at Chernobyl from different perspectives, many organizational contexts come to the fore. In the first report, after this incident, if we'll talk about facts, the INSAG-1 report that came out from International Safety Advisory Group blamed the control room engineers as the cause of the incident, cut down to 6 years. In INSAG-7, the report from the same organization pointed the blame in the design of the reactor So if we hear this narrative in 6 years, it leads us to question, is it bad people in safe systems or well-intentioned people in unsafe systems? I leave you with that thought for the moment. During the course of human error investigations, we focus a lot on who. The moment something goes wrong, it's all about what's the issue and who caused it. But like we said, people do not come to work to do a bad job. Then what could be the approaches to human error investigation? Let's see. 2 things. First, what defines a culture in your workspace? A. Does your workspace incubate a culture where when something goes wrong, we focus a lot on who and point the blame at the person who was in the driving seat? Or B. Does your workspace incubate a culture wherein postmortems and post-incident investigations, we sit down with our employees, our engineers, to have a conversation about what they were thinking and what led them to believe that whatever they were doing in that moment was right according to them by being in their own shoes. Unlike at Chernobyl, where hierarchy made way for decision making rather than the feedback of the engineers. Second, after a major incident, make sure that behavior and thought process are a part of the investigation. We had all the standard run books when the incident occurred at Chernobyl, and yet an out-of-box and an unforeseen situation happened. How people act and how people react depends on a lot of factors other than the incident at hand itself. But then, are we saying that there is nothing like accountability?
I'm not saying that should not have accountability. But accountability is not about exposing and shaming people. Incidents do occur from minor, major, to catastrophic level. And we will never reach a point where we can say an incident will never occur. But what we can do is listen to people's stories. Underneath every story about human error, there is a deeper, more complex story about the organization. Let them lay out the timeline so we can understand their reaction to events and what they are thinking at that moment. When we talk about responsibility, accountability, and authority, clarity in these 3 roles defines an organization that truly empowers people to act and react with clear boundaries. An example of authority-responsibility mismatch: you cannot hold a 25-year-old engineer who has been 4 months in the job and had no idea about the test responsible for the accident if you did not give him authority to be responsible for action intended.
We are talking about approaches to human error investigations. What is integral to each approach is building a safety culture. People should be seen as resources to harness, to learn and to grow an organization. And last but not least, focus on people's working condition. Make sure they come to a space where they feel safe. Give them the space and possibility to do the right things and even make mistakes and learn from them. A culture that encourages learning from the incidents rather than focusing too much on who and holding people accountable without understanding their side is a culture of safety and trust. In such a culture, after every incident and the learnings from it, the organization always becomes a bit better than before. Had the designs been right, had the safety features not been missing, had the test even been postponed to next day's trained crew, and had the people of authority listened to the people of content, who knows, the history might have been different at Chernobyl. Remember, tomorrow in your workspace, in your company, if you find yourself asking, who caused the incident? It's not who, but what caused it. So, the question we should be asking is not who melt Chernobyl down. Instead, what we all should be asking is what melt Chernobyl down. Everyone, I'm Anand Shukla.
I'm Adriano Spadoni. We are IT chapter leads at ING. And thank you for being such a great audience.